Welcome back. Take a moment to get comfortable. Lower the lights, rest your head, and let the day fall away. Tonight I'll tell you some true stories from long ago. They come from a darker, quieter world, lit by gas lamps and candlelight. They are dark stories, but quiet ones. Nothing in them can reach you here. So you don't need to follow every word. Just let my voice carry you along. And whenever you're ready, let yourself drift off to sleep. Tonight's first story is called The Two Lives of Charles Peace. Our story begins in a quiet house on a quiet street in London. A small and comfortable home with lace curtains in the windows. Inside, there is a piano, a Spanish guitar, and cages of softly singing birds. The man of the house is a kindly, elderly gentleman. He goes to church on Sundays. He keeps cats and rabbits and parrots and a gentle little pony. His neighbors know him as Mr. Thompson, a man of quiet means. They have no idea who he really is. For this gentle old man, dozing in his slippers by the fire, is the most hunted criminal in all of England. But to understand how he came to that quiet house, we have to go back many years, to a boy born in the smoke and iron of the city of Sheffield. Chapter 1, A Sheffield Boy. His name was Charles Peace. He was born in Sheffield, in the north of England, on the 14th of May, 1832. His father had once been a tamer of lions and later became a maker of shoes. Charles was a small boy, clever and quick, and full of restless energy. When he was 14, he went to work in the great rolling mills, where they made steel. And there, a terrible accident changed his life. A piece of red-hot metal pierced his leg below the knee. He spent 18 long months in the infirmary. And when at last he came out, he was crippled and would walk with a limp for the rest of his days. But Charles Peace did not let it stop him. If anything, it seemed to make him stronger and more cunning. He taught himself to move in strange and clever ways, and he found, to everyone's surprise, that he had a gift. He taught himself to play the violin. He grew so skilled that people called him a little wonder. He could even play a tune on a violin with only a single string. But Charles Peace had another gift, too, a darker one. He had a gift for taking what did not belong to him. His first theft was a gold watch, slipped from an old gentleman's pocket. He was caught breaking into a house when he was 19. Because he seemed such a quiet, well-mannered young man, he was let off lightly. But it did not stop him. It only taught him to be more careful. In the years that followed, he was caught again and again. He spent long stretches of his young life behind prison walls. And somewhere in those years, he married a widow named Hannah Ward. By day, he tried his hand at honest work, framing pictures. But by night, the other Charles Peace would slip out into the dark. Chapter 2, The Burglar. In time, Charles Peace became the most remarkable burglar England had ever seen. He was small and lean and astonishingly strong. Despite his crippled leg, he could climb like a cat. He could squeeze through a gap a child would struggle with. He could cross the rooftops of a whole street in the dark without making a sound. And he had a trick that no one could quite believe. He could change the very shape of his face. By twisting his jaw and contorting his features, he could make himself look like another man entirely. He would dye his hair and his beard. He would wear spectacles and colored wigs. He had lost some of the fingers on one hand. So he made himself a false arm of hardened rubber, fitted with a small steel hook. With it, he could hold a fork at dinner, and no one would ever guess. He carried his burglar's tools in a violin case. A skeleton key, picklocks, a small drill, a chisel, a folding ladder, and always a revolver. For Charles Peace lived two lives, and he kept them carefully apart. In one life, he was a mild and pleasant little man, fond of music and animals. In the other, he was a shadow, moving through the houses of the rich while they slept. He was caught many times and served many sentences. Once in Wakefield prison, he very nearly escaped. He smuggled in a small saw, made from a piece of tin, and cut his way toward freedom. He was caught at the last moment, but it tells you the kind of man he was. Patient, inventive, and almost impossible to hold. Chapter 3. The Dysons. In 1875, Charles Peace was living in Darnall, a quiet suburb of Sheffield. And there, he met a couple who would change everything. Their names were Arthur and Catherine Dyson. Arthur Dyson was a tall, respectable engineer. And Peace became, for a while, a friend of the family. But his feelings for Mrs. Dyson grew into something dark and obsessive. What truly passed between them, no one will ever know for certain. Peace claimed she cared for him. She would always firmly deny it. But he gave her a ring. They were photographed together. They were seen at the music halls. And slowly, the friendship curdled into fear. Peace began to follow the Dysons, to watch them, to trouble them. At last, Arthur Dyson had had enough. He threw a card over into Peace's garden, with a few cold words written on it. Charles Peace is requested not to interfere with my family. But you could not warn off a man like Charles Peace. He only grew angrier. One day he stopped Mrs. Dyson in the street, and he threatened to blow out her brains and the brains of her husband. The Dysons went to the law and took out a warrant for his arrest. So Peace did what he always did. He vanished. He slipped away to the city of Hull, and the Dysons tried to forget him. They moved across the city to a new home at a place called Banner Cross. They must have hoped they had seen the last of him. They had not. Chapter 4. 2 Murders. While Charles Peace was hiding from the Dysons, he did not stop his nightly work. One August night in 1876, he was robbing a house in Manchester. A young policeman named Nicholas Cox saw him and came toward him in the dark. Peace warned him back. Then he fired, and the young constable fell and died. Now here is the cruel part of the story. Peace slipped away into the night, and no one suspected him. Instead, the police arrested 2 innocent brothers, the Habron brothers. And one of them, young William Habron, was put on trial for his life. Charles Peace, the real killer, came quietly to watch the trial from the crowd. He watched as an innocent man was convicted of his crime, and he said nothing at all. Then, in the November of that same year, Peace came back to Sheffield. He could not leave the Dysons alone. On the night of the 29th of November, he went to Banner Cross. He waited in the dark passage behind their house. When Mrs. Dyson stepped outside, he was there with his revolver drawn. Her husband, Arthur, heard the commotion and came out to help her. And Charles Peace raised his revolver and he fired. Arthur Dyson fell, struck through the head, and within 2 hours he was gone. Peace fled into the night once more. He went first to his mother's house, and then by train away to Hull. And there, he set about disappearing completely. He shaved off his gray beard, he dyed his hair, he put on his spectacles, and he twisted his clever face into someone new. Soon posters appeared, offering a reward of £100. They described a thin, elderly man with gray, almost white hair. But the man they described no longer existed. Charles Peace had become someone else. Chapter 5. The Gentleman of Peckham. For a while Peace wandered, from town to town, never staying long. In the city of Nottingham, he met a woman named Susan Gray. She was fair and well-spoken, and she became his companion. and together with his wife, Hannah, the three of them made their way to London. There, in the quiet suburb of Peckham, Charles Peace settled down. He took a comfortable house, and he became, once again, a new man. He called himself Mr. Thompson, a dealer in musical instruments, a gentleman of means. It was a strange household, and a secret one. His wife, Hannah, lived quietly in the rooms below, while Peace and his companion took the fine rooms above. And the house itself was a picture of comfort, a walnut suite of furniture, a turkey carpet, gilded mirrors on the walls, a piano and an inlaid Spanish guitar, and by the warm fire, a pair of beaded slippers waiting for the master of the house. He filled the place with animals, cats and dogs, rabbits and guinea pigs, canaries and parrots and cockatoos singing in their cages. He bought himself a little pony named Tommy and a small cart to go with it. And when Tommy fell ill and died, the old burglar wept like a child. Mr. Thompson was a respectable man and a friendly neighbor. He held musical evenings and served tea and talked about the news of the day. He went to church on Sundays and bowed his head and sang the hymns. He kept early hours and complained gently of his poor health. He even became an inventor. With a partner, he took out a patent for a clever device for raising sunken ships. No one who met him could have dreamed the truth, that every few nights the kindly Mr. Thompson would take up his violin case. And inside it, not a violin, but the tools of a master burglar. He robbed the great houses all across the south of London, Blackheath and Streatham and Denmark Hill. From a single house, he once took £250 in silver and notes, and then he would come home before dawn to his slippers and his fire and his singing birds. 2 lives side by side, and no one ever knew. Chapter 6. The Fall. It could not last forever. One night, in the October of 1878, Peace went out to rob a house in Blackheath. A policeman named Edward Robinson saw a light moving in the dark windows, and quietly, he waited in the garden. When Peace climbed out through the window, the constable was there. Peace warned him back, as he always did. Then he fired again and again. One bullet passed through the policeman's arm, but Edward Robinson was a brave man. Wounded as he was, he threw himself upon Charles Peace and held on. And this time, the old burglar could not slip away. At first, no one knew who they had caught. They thought him only some elderly stranger. He gave a false name, John Ward, and he kept his secret close. But from his prison cell, he grew lonely. And he made a mistake. He wrote a letter to his inventor friend, asking for news of home. His friend came to the prison and knew him at once. And so, piece by piece, the truth came out. The quiet Mr. Thompson, the prisoner called John Ward. They were both the same man. They were Charles Peace, the man wanted for the murder at Banner Cross. First, he was tried in London for the burglary and for shooting the brave constable. And then they put him on a train to carry him north to face the greater charge, the charge of murder. But Charles Peace was not finished surprising them. As the train rushed along somewhere in the cold winter countryside, he flung himself headlong from the carriage window while the train was at full speed. It was a desperate, astonishing thing to do. He was dragged along and struck his head and lay senseless in the snow. They carried him back, broken and bleeding, but still somehow alive. He was tried at last in the town of Leeds for the murder of Arthur Dyson. The jury heard the whole sad story, and they found him guilty, and the judge sentenced Charles Peace to death. Now, at the very end, the old criminal did one decent thing. He remembered the innocent man, William Habron, still in prison for the murder Peace himself had done in Manchester. And Charles Peace confessed. He told them the truth, and he set the innocent man free. On the 25th of February, 1879, in Armley Prison in Leeds, Charles Peace was led out to the scaffold. The hangman that morning was a man named William Marwood. And Peace, who had spent his whole life in fear of capture, met his end with a strange and perfect calm. He ate a hearty breakfast. He spoke quietly to those around him. And of the scaffold itself, he is said to have remarked that it was only a shortcut to heaven. The man of many faces was gone. The little house in Peckham fell silent, and its singing birds were given away. And the two lives of Charles Peace became at last a single quiet grave. Now settle back for our second story tonight. It is called The Man Who Came Home. Our next story is the strangest of them all. It is not a tale of poison or of a burglar in the night. It is a quiet mystery from a small village in old France, more than 400 years ago. A young man left his home one day and vanished for many long years. And then, one evening, he came back. His wife knew him. His sisters wept and embraced him. The whole village welcomed him home. There was only one small problem. The man who came home may not have been the man who left. To understand the mystery, we must go back to the very beginning. To two children in a little village among the green hills of the south of France. Chapter 1. The Child Marriage. In the village of Artigues, in the south of France, there lived a family named Guerre. And in the January of 1539, their young son, Martin, was married. He was only a boy, just 12 years old, and his bride, Bertrande de Rolls, was no older than he was. In those days, among the wealthier families, such early marriages were common. For a long while, the two children lived together more as brother and sister than as man and wife. But Bertrande loved her young husband and gave herself entirely to his happiness. The years passed, and the children grew, and at last, 9 years after their wedding day, a son was born to them. They named him Sanxi. For a time, the little family was happy in their quiet corner of the world. But Martin Guerre was a restless soul. He had a lively, excitable nature, and the small life of the village chafed at him. And one summer, a single foolish quarrel would change everything. Chapter 2. The Quarrel and the Vanishing. It happened by a spring, in the woods near the village. Bertrande believed she had seen her husband paying too much attention to a pretty neighbor. And in her jealousy and her anger, the words flew between them. She even struck him and left a small scar above his right eyebrow. It was a little thing, the sort of quarrel that passes in a day or two, but Martin Guerre did not let it pass. That very August, in the year 1549, he gathered a few things, and he left the village. He left his wife, he left his little son, and he simply walked away into the wide world. He sent no word, no letter, no message of any kind. The months became years, and still no word came. Poor Bertrande did not know if her husband was alive or dead. She prayed for his return. She longed to go and search for him. But the world was so very large, and she did not even know where to begin. Her husband's uncle, a stern man named Pierre Guerre, managed the family land. And in time he told her gently what everyone had come to believe, that Martin must surely be dead. 8 long years went by. Bertrande wore her grief like a shadow and found her only comfort in her growing son. And then, one day, a man walked back into the village of Artigues. Chapter 3. The Return. He said that he was Martin Guerre. And he looked the part in every way. He was the right height. He had the same dark eyes, the same olive skin, the same hooked nose. And above his right eyebrow there was a small, faded scar. The very scar that Bertrande herself had given him on the day of their quarrel. But it was more than his face. This man knew everything. He knew the secrets of their courtship. He knew the cause of that long-ago argument. He knew the pet names they had whispered to each other. He remembered the letters she had written. He remembered their son as a baby. He greeted old friends by name and recalled small moments from years before. His 4 sisters threw their arms around him and wept for joy. The old family servant knew him at once, and he told them all where he had been. He had wandered far into Spain and taken service with great men. He had marched away to war as a soldier. And at a great and terrible battle at a place called St. Quentin, he had been gravely wounded in the leg. He had nearly lost it. He had nearly died. But he had recovered at last and made the long journey home. It was a moving tale, and the whole village believed it. Martin Guerre had come home. Chapter 4. The Stranger in the House. And so life began again. The man took his place as husband and father and master of the house. In time, Bertrande bore him a little daughter. To all the world, it seemed that her long sorrow was over. But in her own heart, something was not right. There was a coldness in her that she could not explain. This Martin was harsher than the boy she remembered. His very soul seemed changed. And there were other things, small things, strange things. Sometimes when she called him Martin, he did not seem to answer to his own name. Once, he lost his way on a path he should have known by heart. And there was the matter of the language. For Martin had once spoken the old Basque tongue. He had even taught a little of it to Bertrande herself. Yet now, this Martin could not speak a word of it. And one night, while he lay sleeping, she remembered something. Her husband had borne a certain birthmark upon his shoulder. Quietly, she drew back his shirt and looked, and the mark was not there. In that moment, a terrible certainty settled over her. The man sleeping beside her was not her husband. But what could she do? She had welcomed him before the whole village. She had borne him a child. The shame of it, the ruin of it, it held her tongue. And so she kept her dreadful secret and said nothing at all. Chapter 5. The Uncle's Suspicion. If Bertrande stayed silent, another did not. The man who called himself Martin grew bold. He demanded that the uncle, Pierre Guerre, give an account of all the family money. He had managed during the long years of absence. Pierre refused, and so the 2 men went to law. And the newcomer won. The court ordered the old uncle to pay back a great sum. Pierre Guerre was a proud and bitter man, and now he wanted revenge. He began to listen and to ask questions. And one day, some travelers passed through the village, soldiers lately come from Spain. And from them, Pierre heard a troubling thing. They spoke of the real Martin Guerre and of his terrible wound at St. Quentin. They said the leg had been so badly hurt that the surgeons had been forced to cut it off, and that the poor man was thought to have died soon after. But the man living in Martin's house, sleeping in Martin's bed, walked on 2 good legs. Now Pierre was certain. The man was an impostor. A stranger, wearing another man's life like a stolen coat. Chapter 6. The Accusation. Pierre went to Bertrande and told her what he believed. At first, she defended her husband fiercely before everyone. For to admit the truth now was to bring shame upon herself and upon her children. But the doubt was already in her heart. It had been there a long time. And when she learned that the man had been unfaithful to her with a pretty neighbor, her anger at last broke through her fear. She wrote to the magistrates, and she accused the man of being an impostor. He was arrested and brought before the judge in the town of Rio. And there, he was magnificent. He did not falter, he did not stumble, he showed no fear at all. He said it was all the work of the greedy, vengeful uncle. And then he told his story in perfect detail. He named his parents and the days of their deaths. He named his sisters and the priest who had married him. He recalled small moments from his childhood that only the true Martin could know. The judge called witnesses, dozens of them, the man's own sisters, the old servant, the villagers, and nearly every one of them swore that this was Martin Guerre. There was only one odd little clue. A shoemaker remembered that the real Martin's boots had needed 12 lace holes, and the prisoner's feet were smaller, needing only 9. But what was a pair of boots against the word of a whole village? The judge found him guilty, but it was a troubled verdict, for the doubt would not go away. So the prisoner appealed to the great high court, the parliament of the city of Toulouse. Chapter 7. The Court of Toulouse. The high court took up the strange case, and a learned judge named Jean de Coras led it. And the more they looked, the more impossible it became. They brought the uncle Pierre before the prisoner, and the bold prisoner so overwhelmed him that the old man grew confused and tongue-tied and could barely speak. Then they brought Bertrande herself into the court. And here, the impostor played his cleverest hand. He turned upon his own accuser. He reminded her, gently, of her old jealousy, the very jealousy that had driven her true husband away all those years before. He spoke of their children and of the ruin that would fall upon them. And then they placed a cross before Bertrande and commanded her to swear upon her soul that this man was an impostor. She looked at him. She opened her lips. And in a tiny whisper, she said only one word: "No." And then she fell to the floor in a faint. The judges did not know what to believe. A wife who would not swear against him, a village that knew his face, a memory without a single gap. They could not bring themselves to condemn him, and they could not bring themselves to free him. So they sent him back to the village to wait while they searched for more truth. And it seemed the strange man might win after all. But fate was already on the road to Artigues, and it walked on a wooden leg. Chapter 8. The Man with the Wooden Leg. It was evening in the garden, when the old servant came running, white with shock. A man was standing in the courtyard. He was tall and dark, and his clothes were torn from a long, hard road. And where his left leg should have been, there was a leg of wood. Bertrande looked at him, and she knew him. This was her husband. This was the true Martin Guerre. And she fell senseless to the ground. The neighbors who saw the two men together crossed themselves in terror, for the faces were as alike as two reflections in a glass. Both men were taken before the court. And now came the strangest trial of all. For the two Martins told the very same story. The same quarrel, the same journey into Spain, the same war, the same wound at St. Quentin. The impostor had learned his part so perfectly that even now no one could be sure. At last the judge thought of one final test. He would place Bertrande between the two men. And he would trust that a wife's own heart would know her true husband. Weak and pale and near to giving birth again, Bertrande was led into the great hall. She stood between the two men who wore the same face. And slowly, she turned away from the stranger. And she walked to the man with the wooden leg and knelt down before him and wept. But the real Martin Guerre looked down at her with a cold and bitter eye. "Your tears do not move me," he said. "You are the cause of all the sorrows of my house." His hard and dignified scorn told the court everything. This was the true husband. The other was the impostor. and once he was condemned, the false Martin confessed it all. His name was Arnaud Dutil. He had served beside the real Martin in the war. He had watched him fall and learned his every secret and stolen his very life. On the 12th of September, in the year 1560, the sentence was carried out. The impostor was led to the village he had deceived, to make his penance and to die before the house that had never truly been his. And here, the story takes its saddest turn. For at that very hour inside that house, Bertrand lay in the pains of childbirth. And as the false Martin met his end outside, Bertrand and the child slipped quietly away from the world. That evening, two things were carried out into the dusk. The body of the man who had stolen a life to be burned, and the bodies of a mother and her child to be laid gently to rest. And the true Martin Guerre was left at last alone in his own quiet house. And now, our third and final story for tonight. It is called The Marquise and the Poison Box. Our next story is the oldest of them all. It takes us to France, to the grand and golden age of King Louis XIV, to a world of palaces and candlelight and silk, and to a lady of high birth, beautiful, gentle, and admired by all who met her. She had soft blue eyes and a quiet, charming smile. No one who looked at her could have imagined the truth, that this lovely, smiling woman kept a small wooden box, and that inside that box was death enough for a dozen souls. "It is a small box," she once said with a smile, "but it holds a great many inheritances." But to understand the lady and her terrible little box, we must go back to when she was young and rich and had not yet learned the art that would damn her. Chapter 1. The Beautiful Marquise. Her name was Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray. She was born in Paris around the year 1630 into a great and powerful family. Her father was a high official of the city, a man of rank and wealth and respect. She had two brothers who would follow their father into the law, and a sister who had given her life to God in a convent. Marie-Madeleine was beautiful, small and perfectly formed, with a face of such calm that no feeling ever seemed to trouble its beauty. In the year 1651, she was married to a nobleman and became the Marquise de Brinvilliers. She brought with her a great fortune, and for a time she seemed to have everything: wealth, beauty, a noble name, and a place in the brilliant world of Paris. But her husband was a careless, spendthrift man, fond of his own pleasures. And before long, the marriage had grown cold and empty, and into that empty place a new man stepped. Chapter 2. The Lover. It was her own husband who brought him into the house. A handsome young officer, a friend of the family, named Gaudin de Sainte-Croix. He was cheerful and lively and charming, and the Marquise loved him, it was said, from the very first moment she saw him. Her husband, lost in his own affairs, scarcely seemed to notice or to care, but others noticed, and in time the scandal reached her father's ears. Her father was a proud man, and the shame of it was more than he could bear. So he used his power, and he had Sainte-Croix arrested. One evening, on a bridge in Paris, the officers came for him. He was sitting in the Marquise's own carriage at the time. She hid her face behind her veil and was not recognized. But her lover was taken away to the great fortress prison of the city, to the Bastille. And it was there, behind those cold stone walls, that Sainte-Croix would meet the man who taught him how to kill. Chapter 3. The Teacher in the Bastille. In the Bastille, Sainte-Croix was placed in a cell with another prisoner, an Italian named Exili. And this Exili was a poisoner, a master of the art. He had been driven out of Rome, charged with many deaths. He was a man who had taken murder and made of it a careful science. He knew the poisons that killed slowly and the poisons that killed in an instant. He knew the ones that left clear and obvious signs, and the ones that left almost no trace at all. And in that shared cell, with nothing but time, the Italian taught the young officer everything. Day by day, week by week, Saint Croix learned. And by the time the prison doors were opened and he walked free once more, the pupil had grown almost as skilled as his master. He returned to the Marquise, and they were more devoted than ever before. But now, they shared a terrible new secret. And quietly, between them, a dark idea began to grow. For the Marquise had a father and 2 brothers who stood between her and a great fortune. Chapter 4. The First Tests. But a careful poisoner does not begin with those she loves. She begins with a test. The Marquise wished to be certain her new art truly worked. And so she turned to one of her own servants, a maid named Françoise Roussel. One day, she gave the girl a slice of mutton and some preserved gooseberries. And soon, the poor maid was seized with a terrible pain in her stomach. A feeling, she said, as though her heart were being pricked all over with pins. The girl was strong, and she lived. But the Marquise had seen enough to know that her poison was real. She only needed it to be stronger. And so, with her lover, she prepared. For now she had decided what she would do. She would turn her gentle smile and her careful poison upon her own father. Chapter 5. The Father. Her father, weary from his work, planned a quiet stay at his castle in the country, in the great forest near Compiègne, and his loving daughter offered to come and to keep him company. He was glad of it, for she had never been so devoted, so tender, so attentive. She sat with him, she cared for him, she prepared his food with her own hands. And one evening, in that quiet country house, she brought him a bowl of soup. He took it from her, and he ate it. And from that moment, he began to die. The pains came, sudden and violent. The doctors were puzzled and could do nothing. Through it all, his daughter never left his side. She nursed him with such loving care that no one suspected a thing. After several days of suffering, he died in his daughter's arms, blessing, with his final breath, the very woman who had killed him. No one looked for poison. No one dreamed of it. But the Marquise found that her crime had not paid as she had hoped. For most of her father's fortune did not pass to her. It passed to her 2 brothers. And so, the smiling lady was not finished yet. Chapter 6. The Hospital and the Brothers. Before she turned upon her brothers, the Marquise wished to perfect her art. She needed a poison that worked slowly and left no trace of its true nature. And to test it, she found a cruel and clever cover. She was known as a pious and charitable lady. So she began to visit the great hospital of Paris to comfort the sick. She came with kind words and with gifts, biscuits and cakes and sweet wine for the patients. But the gifts were not what they seemed. And one by one, the patients she visited fell into a strange and wasting decline, and quietly died, and the puzzled doctors could find no cause at all. Now she was ready. Her 2 brothers were men of the law, like their father. To reach them, she placed a servant, a man named Lacausse, into one brother's household. And one spring, when the brothers were together at a house in the country, a fine pie was served at their table. Those who ate of it fell ill. Those who did not remained well. The 2 brothers suffered the worst of all. The elder brother lingered for more than 70 days in terrible pain, before at last he died. and a few months later his brother followed him to the grave, with the very same strange and dreadful symptoms. 2 more deaths, 2 more inheritances, and still no one suspected the gentle Marquise. Chapter 7. The Box. For a while it seemed the Marquise and her lover had committed the perfect crimes. But fate, in the end, undid them, and it began with an accident. Sainte Croix had grown ever bolder in his work. He was trying to make a poison so deadly that its fumes alone could kill. To protect himself, he wore a mask of glass over his face as he worked. But one day, as he bent over his furnace, the glass mask slipped and fell. And Gaudin de Sainte Croix dropped dead to the floor, as if struck by lightning. When the officials came to seal up his rooms, they found a small wooden box. And upon it, in his own hand, were written strange and urgent instructions. That the box must be placed at once into the hands of the Marquise de Brinvilliers. The Marquise heard of it and was seized with terror. Late at night, she rushed to the officials and demanded the box be given to her. But her desperation only made them more curious, and they refused. When at last they opened it, they understood everything. Inside were packets of poison of every kind, and papers, and letters written in the Marquise's own hand, and a written confession in which she had set down her crimes with her own pen. The servant Lacosse was arrested and questioned harshly, and he confessed. He told how he had carried the poison on Sainte Croix's orders to the 2 brothers. The net had closed. But the Marquise herself was already gone. She had fled Paris across the border and hidden herself away in a convent in the city of Liège. And there, beyond the reach of French law, she believed that she was safe. Chapter 8. The Chase and the End. The King of France would not let her go. He sent after her one of his cleverest men, an officer named Desgrais. Desgrais was handsome and bold and a master of disguise. He came to the city of Liège, and he did not storm the convent. Instead, he played a part. He presented himself as a charming gentleman, newly come from Rome. And he began, gently, to court the lonely Marquise. She had been shut away, with no company, for a very long time. And she welcomed the kind attentions of the handsome stranger. Over several visits, he won her trust, and at last he proposed a quiet meeting. Away from the convent, in a lonely place outside the town, she came to meet her new admirer. And there, the gentleman threw off his disguise. He was no admirer at all. He was Desgrais, the king's officer. And the Marquise de Brinvilliers was his prisoner. On the long road back to Paris, she tried again and again to take her own life. But she was watched too closely, and she failed. In Paris, she was put on trial. She denied everything. To every question, she answered that she could not remember. But against her stood the testimony of her servants. And worst of all against her stood her own confession, written in her own hand. And found inside that terrible little box, the court had no doubt, the Marquise de Brinvilliers was condemned to die. In her last hours, a gentle priest came to sit with her. And the proud, cold woman softened at last, and confessed the truth to him, and met her end with a strange and quiet courage. On the 17th of July, in the year 1676, in the great square of Paris, before a vast and silent crowd, the beautiful Marquise was put to death. And so ended one of the darkest stories that old France would ever tell. She had been born to wealth and beauty and a noble name, and she had thrown it all away for the contents of a small wooden box. A box that held, as she once said with a smile, a great many inheritances. And so, our stories come to their end. Everyone in them is at rest now, and has been for a long, long time. There is nothing left here to fear. The night is quiet, and so are you. So let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts grow soft and far away. And let the darkness be a gentle one. Sleep well. I'll be here again with more quiet stories whenever you're ready. Good night.